Yeah, thanks, Mariam, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs for organizing this seminar, specifically my friend Riyad Al-Blushi. So as Mariam introduced me, I work for ICANN. ICANN is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Maybe just to get a sense of whether you've ever heard of ICANN. So anybody heard of ICANN before? Oh, okay. Good morning, Aisha. How are you? So I'll tell you a little bit about ICANN, and that will feed into what are domain names. And then the third and final part of this seminar will be covered by Riyad. He'll be talking more about dispute resolution, specifically the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, and he'll probably be sharing some case studies from here in Oman. I usually like my lectures to be interactive. Just feel free to lift your hand anytime and ask me if you have any questions. If you think I'm talking too fast, just ask me to slow down. It's really important that this lecture is really for you. I do a lot of these lectures, so I'm pretty much acquainted with them. So to start, as I said, I'll be talking about two things. I'll talk a little bit about ICANN, and then I'll talk about domain names. So starting with ICANN. ICANN stands, as I mentioned, for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Our role is really to coordinate the unique identifiers of the Internet. When we talk about unique identifiers, it's domain names, IP addresses, and protocols. I guess we all know google.com and maybe mgla.gov.om or maybe tra.gov.om. So these are all domain names. We type domain names to maybe go to websites, or we use them in our emails to denote that this is our work email ID or even maybe personal email ID. We talk about IP addresses. IP addresses are actually, yes?
They were saying they can't hear you, so maybe you should use the other.
Oh, okay.
You keep this one. Keep it on. Go ahead.
Yeah,
this one.
sure. And we use another one?
Yes.
All right. So I'm fully connected today.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah.
الصور
خلاص هذا
فمك نيل دمو
شو
قريب من فمك
احكي فيها يعني؟
ايه
هلو هلو
كم رقم
هلو
تو تو خلي قريب لبسه ايوه هذا خلي قريب اكثر
اوكي
خلي قريب من فمك
طيب
ايوه هذا مال الكاميرا
خلاص فاين هاي كمان ديفايس
تمام ودائما تتكلم وتقرب
خلاص. Okay, some technical issues. So yeah, I was saying we coordinate the unique identifiers of the Internet, and when you hear the term unique identifiers, it really means domain names, IP addresses, and protocols. Now the Internet actually functions on IP addresses. If we do not have IP addresses, really the Internet does not function. Reason is that IP addresses actually tell you to which tells, let's say, a data packet on the Internet where it should be heading. So when you type google.com, there are a number of packets that go through the Internet. Google.com actually has an IP address, and with these IP addresses, these packets know where they are heading. The third thing is protocols, and protocols actually help different devices to interact with one another. You can look at different devices as people speaking different languages, but since we have unified standards, these different devices can communicate. So let's say I use WhatsApp on my iPhone device, and maybe Riyad uses WhatsApp on his Android device. And so when I send him a WhatsApp message, he can see it, he can read it, and he can also reply to me. He uses a phone different to mine. His phone uses an operating system different to mine, but both devices can actually communicate because there are standards that actually help this communication to happen. So when you hear the term unique identifiers of the Internet, this means domain names, IP addresses, and protocols. Of course, it's very much important to know that ICANN does not regulate the Internet or does not regulate unique identifiers. Our role is really to coordinate. Reason is that the Internet actually is not run by one entity. So the internet is actually an interconnection of more than 65,000 networks that are connected with one another and that communicate with one another. So if you ever think that there is one entity that runs the internet, that's not a correct claim, really. That's a very false claim from a technical standpoint. At ICANN, we have a mission. Our mission is really to ensure the security and stability of the internet's unique identifier systems. We do work on, so we have one of the things we actually maintain is the root server system of the internet. The root server system is more of the yellow pages of the internet. Now, the internet understands IP addresses. We as human beings understand domain names. So we all can type google.com, right? But I'm sure nobody knows what's the IP address of google.com. And so you need a translation mechanism where the internet understands IP addresses while I know domain names. So the root server system helps this translation to happen. It maps domain names to IP addresses and vice versa. We do a lot of policy development coordination on issues related to top-level domains. We also collaborate a lot with different partners in the internet ecosystem to ensure that the internet is functioning. ICANN has a very unique ecosystem. The early days of the internet was mostly academic. It was funded by the Research and Development Agency in the United States, which is a government entity. But even though academics thought that the internet will end up being an academic tool for academics to actually exchange information, it turned out that everybody around the world is using the internet. So whether you are a government servant or maybe working for a private company or even an end user in your evening time, everybody uses the internet. And so we have a belief at ICANN that all policies related to domain names must actually be developed by everybody who uses the internet. So we have this triad in our ecosystem. At the top, you see the ICANN community. And this is where actually all the policy development happens. We have a board of directors who actually approve policies, and they send it to the ICANN organization for implementation. We use a model called the multi-stakeholder model of governance. So it's not that governments build policies, it's not the private sector that builds policies, it's actually the multi-stakeholder community that builds policies. The term multi-stakeholder was defined to include 5 stakeholder groups. So you have governments, you have the private sector, you have civil society, you have academia, and you have the technical community. So collectively, these are all the multi-stakeholders of internet governance. Now, the way we do policies at ICANN is done in a bottom-up, consensus-driven multi-stakeholder approach. By bottom-up, it's not that we have an authority that asks for the policy to happen. It can so happen that a group of people with a common interest decide that there is a policy that we need to work on. They try to convince other stakeholders within the community to build it up. They form a working group, they build a policy. Once they are fine with the final report, they send it to the ICANN board of directors so that it's either approved or maybe returned back to the community for further deliberations. But it does start at the bottom with the community. Over the years, ICANN has grown to become a really large organization that covers many topics. And not everybody within the ICANN ecosystem is interested in each and every topic that is tackled within ICANN. And so the work at ICANN is usually broken down into constituencies. So we have what we call supporting organizations and advisory committees. Now the difference between the supporting organizations and the advisory committees is that supporting organizations develop the policies, whereas advisory committees provide advice on the policy while it's developed. So we have 3 supporting organizations where much of the policy development is happening, and we have 4 advisory committees. One of the supporting organizations is the address supporting organization, and they are responsible for developing policies related to IP addresses. We have the country code name supporting organization. Country codes are names like .om for Oman, UK for the United Kingdom, SA for Saudi Arabia. So these are all country codes. And country codes have a different way of actually developing policies. And of course, they have different interests. Reason is that a country code is usually bounded by legislation and laws of the local country that they operate in. So for example, here in Oman, you have .om. Policies related to .om are not done by ICANN, are not done by the internet community at large. They are actually done by the CCTLD operator, which is the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of the Sultanate of Oman. We have the GNSO, the Generic Name Supporting Organization, and much of the policy development related to generic names happens here. So names like .com, .net, .gov, .org, and the list goes on actually. And this is actually the largest body within the ICANN ecosystem. And actually the whole concept of uniform UDRP and other kinds of dispute resolution processes or policies happen within the GNSO. We have 4 advisory committees. One is called the At-Large Advisory Committee, and this is the home of internet end users. So if you are interested really in being part of ICANN's policy development and you'd like to enter through the system, usually people start through the At-Large Advisory Committee. We have the Governmental Advisory Committee, and this is where governments come and sit on the table and provide advice on different policies. Of course, governments here have an important role in ensuring that these policies do not entirely conflict with things back home. So let's say there is a legislation back home that does kind of conflict with a generic name. So there are some consultations that occur. Maybe exceptions could happen, but the main point is really to find a compromise that does not affect countries in their legal laws and in their local laws and legislations. We have the Root Server System Advisory Committee, and this is the home of root servers. I did mention a while ago that root servers actually are servers or systems that actually translate domain names to IP addresses and vice versa. I will not be getting into root servers. That's a completely different topic and does need its time really. We have the Security and Stability Advisory Committee. So if you go back to ICANN's mission, our mission is to ensure the security and stability of the Internet's unique identifier systems. So this committee makes sure that whatever policies are developed or being developed at ICANN, that they maintain the security and stability of the Internet. So the end result is really to improve the Internet, to make it go in line with developments, but at the same time it's very important that the Internet remains secure and stable. I did mention about the Generic Name Supporting Organization. So this is actually how the Generic Name Supporting Organization looks like. I will not be going into details, but it's worth noting that, as probably many of you have interest in law and the legal side of things, one of the constituencies we have within the Generic Name Supporting Organization is called the Intellectual Property Constituency. This is the place where usually law firms who work on intellectual property find this their home, especially if they are working on, if they have a portfolio of domain names either for them or their clients, or maybe they are working on a dispute for one of their clients or on a certain domain name. But generally speaking, much of the policy development at ICANN happens here. Much of the work is really within the GNSO. Now that was the first part on ICANN. Maybe if anybody has any questions, any comments before I move on to the second part on domain names. Any questions maybe?
We'll take questions again towards the end.
Sure. So talking about domain names, I did mention that the Internet understands IP addresses, but we as human beings, it's very much easy for us to actually remember names. It's very similar to our phone number directory on our phones. So we have a directory on our phones, right? Our contacts. So we have names, we have that are connected to phone numbers. We never, I bet I would find anybody in the room who actually remembers each and everybody's phone number and just types it through the keypad. I have more than 1,000 contacts on my phone, and I don't remember. I don't remember my wife's phone number. So leave alone remembering anybody else's phone number. And it's very similar in the domain name industry. So domain names are there to really make our lives easy. Now, one other advantage is that a domain name could be connected to more than one IP address, and it could also be connected to different types of IP addresses. So actually, on the internet, there are two different types of IP addresses. So we have IP address version 4 and IP address version 6. What's globally used is IPv4, but the trend is actually to move towards IPv6, especially that we are talking today about 5G and the rollout of smart cities and Internet of Things and so on. And all these new technologies actually require more and more IP addresses. Top-level domains, it's very important that we know what top-level domains are. So we have different kinds of top-level domains. We have country codes, like .om in Oman, .in for India, .uk for the United Kingdom. So let me ask you a question. How many countries does the world have? Anybody would like to make a guess? 190. Let's try to increase it a little bit. So it's actually 196, and the latest edition was actually South Sudan. But we have 253 country codes. Reason is that country codes do not just include countries, they also include economies. So if you look at islands in the Caribbean, such as St. Lucia, or maybe Grenada, or if you go to the Pacific island, such as Christmas Island, or maybe Fiji, these are not countries, these are economies. They have a motherland, so they belong maybe to Australia, some of them belong to the UK, but they do have their own country codes. And that's why we have more country codes than the number of countries that exist. We have generic top-level domains. And actually, by the way, it's very much worth noting that country codes are usually 2 characters. So if you see a top-level domain that only consists of 2 characters, that is a country code top-level domain. We have generic names, generic top-level domains. Those consist of 3 characters and more. The legacy ones, such as .com and .net and .gov, and more of those, 21 I think they are, they initially consisted of 3 characters. But with the expansion of the internet and the expansion of the domain name space, we have much more. We have names that consist of 4 characters and beyond. Of course, today we have almost 1,100 generic top-level domains. We have internationalized domain names, or even internationalized domain names, top-level domains. And these are top-level domains in local languages. So here in Oman, for example, you can actually register Arabic domain names under Nuqta Oman. So Nuqta Oman is a top-level domain. It's in Arabic. It's run by the TRA. And you can actually register domain names under .oman in Arabic. This is a timeline of the rollout of top-level domains. So in 1985, we started with 7 names. All of them were 3 characters. And then in 2000, we started with, 7 more names were added. What was different this time is that we saw names that consisted of 4 characters and beyond. In 2004, 6 more names were added. In 2012, we had .post added. And starting in 2013, actually, we started seeing more and more new names getting added to the internet. So names like .club, .xyz, .shabaka in Arabic, .london, .paris, .New York City. So yeah, these are actually top-level domains that do exist on the internet. The idea behind having this new program on generic top-level domains, or introducing new generic top-level domains, was really threefold. So one was competition. More competition means more innovation. And more innovation really means more choice for users. One example I can give you about the way this program did bring about some innovation, at least, is the example of Alphabet. So Alphabet is the mother company of Google. And when Alphabet actually launched They announced actually 2 key domain names. I mean, I'm sure they would have registered much more than 2. But 2 of their domain names, one was abcdefg, hijklmnop, So that was their first domain name. So actually, if you type that on your web browser, it sends you to Alphabet's website. Now that's a long name, so you're talking about the 26 characters of English and then .com. The other name that they registered was actually abc.xyz. So if you go to your web browser and just type abc.xyz, it actually sends you to Alphabet's website. This is how the GTLD landscape looks today. I mean, it's not a comprehensive list of all the names that are registered, but you can see names like .music, .book, .app, .store, .soccer, .shop, .mail. It's really a large list, actually. So if you go to our website called newgtlds.icann.org, you can see all the names that were actually introduced in the root server system of the internet. I mentioned about internationalized domain names. These are domain names that you can register in your local languages, maybe Arabic, Russian, Hindi, Urdu, and really the list goes on and on. IDNs are usually names that consist of anything other than the usual traditional English alphabet. So even if you have, let's say, words that Latin words, let's say, that consist of maybe 2 dots at the top, or maybe a hat on the top, or maybe some hat on the bottom, these are also names that you can actually register. That's it from me. I spoke about ICANN, I spoke about domain names. Any questions maybe before I hand it over to Riyadh? Yes, please.
Can I just ask the legacy generic top-level domain names like .eu and
Sure.
so on?
Sure.
Are those regulated by ICANN in terms of who can use them?
Okay, so it's not okay. Number one, we don't regulate. It's not, we just coordinate. So for example, .edu was given to an academic institute to run it. .gov, for example, is solely for the US government, and that's run by the US government. I haven't seen any contracts recently that actually did suggest that they would be moved to other entities. So I'm talking specifically here about .mil, .gov, and .edu. But when we talk about, for example, .org, .net, or even .com and .net currently are run by VeriSign, but there is a contract every couple of years, or a bid, where it's just introduced to the public and anybody can actually bid to run them. .org at the moment, for example, is run by PIR, Public Interest Registry. I think in 2002, until 2002, it was run by VeriSign. But after 2002, the Internet Society took over of it, and then they incorporated a company called Public Interest Registry to actually run it. They did try to sell it before COVID. The sale of .org resulted in a failure, so it's still at the moment with PIR. Now, when we talk about the generic top-level domain, the new ones are literally owned by the companies who applied for it, because they paid hefty amounts of money. You're talking about $250,000 to run those names. It's owned by them. But if they fail to meet a certain technical criteria, it could be handed over to others. But yeah, when we talk about the legacy ones, it's usually the .com and the .net that actually goes through tenders every couple of years. But the rest are really stuck with whichever registry runs them. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, please.
You spoke during the presentation about Arabic language domain names.
Yeah.
Such as .umar. In your opinion, why do you think we haven't seen any domain name used by?
Yeah, that's a good question. So anything other than, now, when the internet, when computer systems were invented, unfortunately, they only understood ASCII. So when you look at the zeros and ones of any computer system, it actually is translated from ASCII. Now, when we talk about domain names in languages, such as in Arabic, neither the domain name system nor computer systems nor the internet understand. So if we have a domain name, let's say Muscat Nuqta Oman, systems don't understand it. So there is a mechanism to actually break it down from Arabic into ASCII. It's an algorithm called Punycode. So Punycode is an algorithm that translates from anything that is non-ASCII to ASCII. And ASCII is the standard or the system that computers understand, that the internet understands. So this brings about a lot of problems. So for example, there is this topic called universal acceptability of domain names. Not all systems understand anything other than ASCII. So let's say you go to your Oman Air account website and you try to create an account using your email ID and your password. Chances that the Oman Air platform doesn't understand any of the new GTLDs is quite high. And chances that the system doesn't understand an email ID in Arabic is even higher. Now, one other problem, for example, with internationalized domain names is that email systems do not every email system understands what an internationalized domain name is. So let's say the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs, their systems understand Arabic email IDs. And let's say Riyadh has an email ID in Arabic. He tries to communicate with me. If my email system doesn't understand what an Arabic email ID is, it will just reject it. It will assume that it's spam. So there are many universal acceptability issues with internationalized domain names. And that's why internationalized domain names didn't fly off. I could say that actually as a fact, for a fact here in the Arab region. But if you go to countries like China and Russia, there is a huge uptake for internationalized domain names. But again, if you take it as a percentage of the population or as a percentage of the number of ASCII domain names registered in the same country, again, the percentages is pretty much low. So yeah, in a nutshell, there are problems that need to be solved. Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
My question is related to the trademark and the relation to the IP.
Sure. So that's for Riyadh.
That's the part of the
Yeah, so that's Riyadh's part.
Yes, I think we should continue the questions after I finish.
Sure, fine. All right, thank you for listening. Okay, that's yours. Hook it up. And that's yours.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Fahad, very much for this presentation. I think it was important for everyone to understand what a domain name is before we start this section, and also understand the role of ICANN because they created this procedure that we will talk about. Talking about internationalized domain names, the Ministry of Legal Affairs actually registered Qanun Nuqta Oman as its website before. But the structure of the domain name was so unusual, people did not understand that was a domain name. So behind the official gazette, we used to type Qanun Nuqta Oman, but nobody understood that was actually our website name that people could have typed in their browser to get to our website. So I think one of the issues was even the marketing of what an Arabic domain name is was one of the issues. So we decided that we're not going to register a new domain name in Arabic after the merger because we became Wizarат al-Adil and Shu'un al-Qanuniyya. So the part of the presentation that I will deliver is about dealing with a scenario like this. What happens if somebody other than Bank Muscat registers bankmuscatonline.com? Registering a domain name under the .com GTLD is actually very cheap. It only costs $10. So that's about 4 or 3 riyals. And people can do it for many different reasons. There are people who are opportunists and they hear of a new business or a new project and they go and buy the domain name with the hope of selling the domain name to the actual company. So maybe someone would hear, oh, Majd al-Fatim is opening a new mall in Salalah, and they will call it City Center Salalah. So they're like, let me go and register City Center Salalah and try to sell it to Majd al-Fatim. Some people might actually have more malicious motivations. So someone might go and register something like facebook.com, but instead of 2 O's in book, they do 3 O's. So it's like facebook.com. And they use it for phishing purposes. So by mistake, because you type very quickly, you might go to facebook.com, and then you would go to a website that's identical to Facebook, and you will put your username and password, and they would get it. So that's how criminals can collect your personal data. Then they would go to the actual Facebook and ask your friends to send you money, which some people might have seen. There are also like some other people who might want to register a domain name for more like non-competitive reasons. So imagine someone registering Amwaj, but with the wrong spelling. And as you know, Amwaj spelling is very complicated. It's like A-M-O-U-A-G, I don't know what. And they might sell fake Amwaj perfume. So you would go to Amwaj with the wrong spelling and buy the fake perfume at the higher price. They can also collect your credit card details. So like it's actually very risky when this happens to the consumers and to the brand owners. These practices are usually like classified under 3 categories. So there's something called cyber squatting. Cyber squatting is when somebody buys a domain name with the intention of selling the domain name. And there's something called typo squatting. It's when people register the mistyped version of the domain name for more malicious reasons. You're not going to sell a mistyped domain name to the brand owner, but like you might use it to steal people's IDs. And there's like this other unfair competition. Somebody might buy, say, Gucci online to sell fake Guccis or to harm your brand. The standard position in the law, if ICANN did not come up with the solution that we will discuss, is that you might consider using trademark protection. And for people who attended our last seminar on this topic, you can use trademark protection to stop other people from using your trademark if they use it in the course of a business in relation to a good or a service. So if somebody creates a website that uses your domain name and the domain name is registered as a trademark, technically you can sue them for trademark infringement if the website is used in the course of a business in relation to a good or a service. And that might work for a case such as somebody buying Amwaj.com with a misspelling to sell fake Amwaj, or somebody buys Gucci.com to sell fake Guccis. That would be a practice, like, in relation to the sale of a good or service. But if sorry.
But you have to sue him in his country.
We will discuss this now. Those are the challenges, yes. Sheikha, you have to be patient. We'll discuss this in a bit. But the issue, like with trademark, there are multiple issues that we will discuss now. But there's a fundamental issue with trademark, is that it only applies to the use in the course of a business in relation to a good or a service. If someone registers a domain name and does not use it, they just want to sell it, is that used in the course of a business in relation to a good or a service? It probably is not, because you did not use a trademark. You only registered the domain name. So that's a fundamental restriction with the use of trademark to stop someone from using your domain name. There are also other issues, like my colleague Sheikha said. The first one is jurisdiction. If someone in Oman registered a domain name under a .om ccTLD, like the Omani domain name, it's relatively easy, because the trademark owner would be Omani based here. The person who registered the domain name would be here, and the registry responsible for the domain name and the company that sold you the domain name would all be here. But imagine if someone in China is selling fake Amwaj perfume, and they are based in China. They register Amwaj.com with a different spelling. The authority responsible for the registry is ICANN or VeriSign, I'm not sure, like Fahad said. But the company that sold the domain name would be something like GoDaddy. So the company would be American. The person who bought the domain name is Chinese in China, and the rights holder is in Oman. Number one, the trademark might not be registered in China, because it's a Omani product. So you can't go to the court in China and say, oh, like this person violated my trademark. And then there's this issue. Would you actually go all the way to China to sue someone because they violated your trademark? If you go to the court in Oman to sue for trademark infringement, there is nothing you can do to enforce the judgment in China. So jurisdiction issues are very serious in regard to domain name disputes. The second issue with trademark, using trademark as a mechanism, is that it can be very slow, even here. If you sue someone, you would have to go with the primary court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. That can take years. And it can also be expensive if somebody actually tries to do it with the jurisdiction issue and try to sue someone internationally. For all these reasons, it's actually very difficult to use trademark protection to stop someone from using your domain name. And for this very reason, ICANN came up with a mechanism it's basically an alternative dispute resolution mechanism for dealing with the very specific issue of cyber squatting, tap squatting, and the unfair use of domain names. This process is essentially a form of arbitration, but it's a very unique form of arbitration that's only paper-based and online. To understand the contractual relationship, usually ICANN is a registry, and they authorize people to sell domain names. The people who sell the domain names are like the companies that would reach the final party that would buy the domain name. ICANN, in its policies and procedures, they require the registrars to introduce a condition in the licensing contract for buying the domain name to resolve to this dispute resolution mechanism, which is called the UDRP. So it's essentially a form of arbitration in the contract you sign to register the domain name. The benefits of the UDRP process is that it's very cheap. It can cost as little as $1,500. And it's similar to arbitration. So you can actually select the number of panelists. This price is usually for one panelist, and the person who makes a complaint pays this amount. But you usually have the option to go up to 3 panelists. Obviously, if you choose more panelists, the price increases. The price also is based on how many domains you want to complain about. The cases that I talked about seem to be about a single domain name, but usually when there's a cyber squatter, they would buy 100 domain names. So it's like amwaj.com, Amwaj Online, by Amwaj, eAmwaj. So you can actually make a complaint for multiple domain names in a single complaint, but the price will vary depending on how many domain names you're complaining about. The process is also very fast. So from the start to end, it can take on average between 60 to 90 days. And if you compare this to going to court, it's like impossibly quicker. It's also directly enforceable. If you get a court judgment, how you enforce it against a domain name registrar is very complicated in a different country. With the UDRP, because it's required by contract through the relationship between ICANN, the registrars, and the registrant, the registrar has a duty to immediately implement it. So those are the benefits of the UDRP. To use this process and to complain, ICANN has identified or designated a number of what they call UDRP providers, which is essentially, in the world of arbitration, which would be like an arbitration center. And there are 6. So there is one in the Arab world called the Arab Center for Domain Name Dispute Resolution. There is one in Asia, there is one in the EU. But the most famous and popular ones are the last 2. There is one called Forum, which is in the US, and there is WIPO. So WIPO provides dispute resolution services, and you can use them to resolve like one of the UDRP complaint. If you use this process, there are 3 possible remedies. So you complain about the domain name, saying this is my domain name, it should not have been registered. The UDRP panel can have one of the 3 remedies. They can refuse your complaint and not do anything, or they can transfer the domain name to you or cancel the registration. So if somebody buys Bank Muscat Online, you might want to get it. But if someone registers Amwaj with a messed up spelling, you just want to cancel it. You don't need the domain name. It's very important to note that this process does not provide for the payment of damages. So unlike trademark litigation, you can get money out of the process. But for UDRP, there is no money that you can get. Even the fees you pay for the complaint, you cannot claim it back. But technically, you can also use like traditional litigation to get any losses you incurred. Now, what does it mean to make this complaint, and what do you need to establish? The UDRP is a policy that's published by ICANN, and it has very specific requirement to make a successful case. Basically, number 1, you need to establish that the domain name that has been registered is identical or confusingly similar to your trademark. Secondly, you need to establish that the person who registered the domain name has no rights in this domain name. Finally, you have to establish that this person registered the domain name and used it in bad faith. So those are the 3 criteria that needs to be established to claim your domain name back. And you need to establish all of them. So if one of them is not satisfied, you can't win. And the domain name would remain with the person who registered it. We'll try to explain in detail what this means. So number 1, the domain name has to be identical to a trademark or confusingly similar. So it does not actually have to be identical. For the case of Bank Muscat, the trademark is Bank Muscat, not online. But the fact that there are words such as online does not mean that it's different. And also, if there's like a mistyped domain name, so like Amwaj, but with a different spelling, that's still confusingly similar. It's also important to note that you're actually not required to have a registered trademark. So it says you need to have a trademark, and like in different legal systems, you can establish that you have a common law trademark. And in some cases, you can even like claim that your name is used by you for trading. Secondly, you need to establish that the person has no rights in this domain name. This becomes like a reverse process, but the policy has some examples of what can be considered as legitimate interest. So if that person is using the domain name to offer some goods or services, that would be an example of a legitimate interest that would crush your case. Also, if the person is known by that domain name, then that person would have some interest. Finally, there are some cases where the person would not be known by the domain name, but they might use the domain name to criticize the product or do some reviews or use it in a way that's actually fair and legitimate. So maybe someone is creating a website where they review like Lexus cars or something. It might be allowed to be considered a legitimate interest in using that domain name. Finally, the domain name must be registered and used in bad faith. The policy sets some examples of what would be considered as bad faith. So if the person registers the domain name and then solicits the trademark owner to buy it, that would be considered an example of bad faith that would allow the transfer. Also, if there is evidence that the domain name is used to disrupt the service or actually lead to some confusion among the customers of the product, all these are examples of bad faith. So now I'll talk about 2 cases that demonstrate how this is used. So this is a real case. Someone registered citycentersohar.com and Majd al-Fatim complained. What they said is that this person registered the domain name on the same day they announced the mall. So that day where the announcement, the press release went out at 8 p.m., this person registered the domain name. They complained, and they were like, they had to establish the 3 elements. Number 1, is the domain name similar to a trademark that is owned by Majd al-Fatim? They were like, yes, we have registered this domain name on these dates, which was prior to the complaint, and that was easy to establish. They moved to the second element. Did this person have any legitimate interest in using this domain name? They went to the website. It had nothing but links to ads for hotels. So there was no evidence that this person was using the domain name to offer a service or to do anything legitimate. Finally, they were like, you need to establish that this person has registered the domain name and is using it in bad faith. The person responded saying, I did not solicit them. I did not try to sell them the domain name. But the panel looked at it and they were like, we have evidence that you registered the domain name on the same day as the announcement. And for them, that was sufficient to establish bad faith. So they proved the 3 elements and the domain name was transferred to Majd al-Fatim. We have another more interesting case. So this mallofoman.com was actually registered by a subsidiary of the Lulu Group. So Lulu Group bought mallofoman.com before the mall was created. And the thing so Majd al-Fatim complained, and they were like, obviously this domain name is similar to a trademark that we own, but at the time, Mall of Oman was not actually operational at all. So they told them, we are known for Mall of the Emirates, and we are one of the biggest companies in this sector, in the whole region. Obviously, Mall of any country would be known or like thought of by the users to be something related to Majd al-Fatim. So they're like, this is identical to our product. And then they were like, does this company have any interest? They were like, from our point of view, this company has no interest because they have no moles called mole of something. And finally, they were like, this domain name was registered in less than 2 weeks before we registered our trademark. So Majd al-Fatim registered Mole of Oman as a trademark in Oman, but like 12 days before, Lulu Group registered moleofoman.com. And they were like, this is not coincidental. They're like, we believe that like the Lulu Group knew about our trademark, and that's why they went ahead and registered the domain name before we do this. Lulu Group responded saying, number one, this domain name is not similar to their trademark, because they can, at the time of registration, at the time itself, there was nothing called Mole of Oman. And Majd al-Fatim cannot have control over the description Mole of, because that's a very descriptive trademark, and there are much more famous moles that are not owned by Majd al-Fatim. Mole of America, Mole of Africa. So like these people cannot own Mole of. And then they were like, from our point of view, we do also agree with them that the fact that the domain name and the trademark registration was similar in a way that was not coincidental, because we believe Majd al-Fatim registered the trademark because they knew we registered the domain name. They're like, their trademark is actually in violation of our rights, not the other way around. And they also said, we have moles that are called mole of, and they said we have an approval in the UAE to create something called the mole of al-Qawain, which is mole of UAQ, because al-Qawain. And the panel looked into this, and they were like, we need to establish 3 things. Trademark is identical, and then that they have no legitimate interest, and the registration was, the domain name was registered in bad faith and used in bad faith. And they were like, we do not believe that Lulu Group registered the domain name in bad faith, because it was before the trademark was registered. And Majd al-Fatim cannot have control over these 2 words. So Majd al-Fatim lost, and it's unbelievable. But if you go to your phone now and type moleofoman.com, it will take you to Oman Avenues, the actual website right now. But it's insane, it's unbelievable.
That's why it's confusing.
Yeah, and there is true, like Mole of al-Qawain, it's like it's in al-Qawain, like it's a real mall, like nobody heard of it. But it's insane. So those 2 are 2 examples of how local companies here use the UDRP. They succeed at times, they fail at times, but it's a very powerful tool. And what I have described earlier was only about .com, .net, .org, generic top-level domain names. Because as Fahad mentioned, the country code domain names are regulated by each country, the authority in each country. So what I said does not automatically apply to .om domain names. And we have someone from the TRA. So the TRA is responsible for the management and regulation of domain names. But in Oman, the executive regulation of the industrial property law, which was issued by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, not the TRA, wrote in Article 66 that the UDRP actually applies to domain names, Omani domain names, and that WIPO is the provider of the dispute resolution mechanism. So I believe that the rules also, the same conditions and same rules, they apply to Omani domain names. And that's it. Hope you guys